Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us just 4 days before the beginning of Passover. It's great to be with you all. Early Hag Sameach. Um, Welcome to this presentation, this two-part series sponsored by Temple Sinai's Adult Education Committee, chaired by Ruth Goldstein and Valerie Kamea. Thank you, Ruth and Valerie, and to the entire Adult Ed Committee. Thank you so much. And yeah, I want to encourage you to open up your chat box and feel free to put some comments in the chat box. And we will be having a discussion during the next hour and a half. And so I want to encourage you to stay muted and then unmute when we have that discussion. So I had promised you all before we began a PDF, and here it is. So if you check your chat box, it is uploading and it was just sent. So you should see the PDF file of this class, which we are calling The Heart of Jewish Spirituality, Emotional Power in Religious Life. Does everybody see that? Are you able to see that? You can sort of just nod if you're able to click on the PDF and you're able to pull that up. Great. And again, I'll be sharing my screen as well, so you can see the slides in real time.
Rabbi, I'm seeing that Sally is having a hard time joining, and I'm not sure why. So, but I let her in. Just don't know what's happening. But just keep
Well,
going.
if it's not too much trouble, Susan, if you could maybe text her, and maybe there's another way she might try on her phone or another device if she's having a hard time.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, let me go ahead and share the screen. Okay, let's try. That's interesting. Let me try that one more time. Okay, can you all see that? All right, wonderful.
Yeah.
Great, great, great. All right, well, very excited to be teaching this class. This class really is, I want to say it's at least 15 to 17 years in the making, because I'm going to be using primarily, in addition to all of the Jewish resources of the past 3,000 years, I am going to be using fabulous books on religion, spirituality, as well as psychology and neuroscience. And I'm going to be sharing those books with you in the thesis of those books. I find it fascinating, and I hope that you do too. And so why don't we get right to the heart of the matter, the heart of Jewish spirituality, emotional power, and religious life. So as I click on the screen, can you see that? All right, so this is how I would like to frame the conversation. So when we think of religion, we might first think of beliefs, and we might first think of theology. For example, if we want to know about Islam, maybe we'll get a book on Islam, we'll Google Islam, and we might try to find out, well, what are the tenets of the Islamic faith? What are the beliefs? What is the theology? What is the theology and the beliefs of Hinduism or Buddhism? Does Buddhism believe in a God concept? The theology, do they not believe in a God concept? Which branch of Buddhism? Maybe one branch of Judaism does have a sense of divinity. So when we think of religion, same with Judaism. If people want to ask about, well, what is Judaism about? we would probably express something about our beliefs, the beliefs about Judaism, that we believe in God, we believe that that the Torah is our primary book of Jewish wisdom, and we might really focus on beliefs, theology, ideas, and those are extremely important. They are essential to any religious faith. And at the same time, our emotions, our feelings, our emotions are crucial to human spirituality and to religion. And that is why I love the two books that I'm going to share with you tonight and the claims of these two books. They really put emotions front and center in the 200 plus pages of each book. And I happen to concur, and we might even share during these next two classes our own experiences of what emotions really we express in our Jewish faith. And is it possible that your emotional life really brought you to a deeper connection to Judaism? And I might share with you when I was growing up, for me personally, emotions were the driving factor of my deepening of my Jewish faith when I was a teenager. It was very much emotion based. Yeah, but for other people, it may be more cognitive, it may be more idea based. But as we're going to go through and you're going to see the argument, you might find yourself saying, yeah, I see what the authors are saying, and maybe I see what Abraham Joshua Heschel is saying, and I see what the Hasidic tradition is saying, because certainly Heschel and the Hasids put emotion very prominently in their approach to religious life. But again, the cognitive, the ideas, the theology beliefs are very much there as well. So it's not an either or, it's a both and we're going to spotlight emotions primarily during these next two classes. So we're going to explore transformative spiritual and religious emotions, such as joy and awe, AWE, love, compassion, and grief. Very important. All five of those are important. We could discuss 10 to 15 religious and spiritual emotions, but there's not enough time in these two series. So I want to take a deep dive into joy, awe, love, compassion, and grief. And we'll probably be referencing other emotions as well, other spiritual and religious emotions as well. So we're going to look at them from a Jewish perspective, and we're going to use the latest findings of neuroscience and affective neuroscience and affective psychology, which is a fancy way of saying emotional psychology or emotional neuroscience. There was a neuroscientist in the 1980s who coined the term affective neuroscience, and we're going to be referencing that particular neuroscientist as we look at one of the books. And by looking at neuroscience and affective neuroscience, affective psychology, we're going to see that emotions are the driving factor of religious life. That's the thesis of these two books. That is the thesis that I happen to agree with, that emotions are the driving factor of religious life. And one could even argue emotions are the driving factor of human existence. And a number of neuroscientists and people studying emotion and even people who talk about how we make decisions. I think Daniel Kahneman is the only psychologist who won a Nobel Prize, and he was talking about how emotions are very much a part of the decision-making process. So we're going to combine the head and the heart, and we're going to see that they are interconnected, that the head, our ideas, the cognitive aspect of our life are very much intertwined with the emotional and affective aspect of our life. And I want to just um, uh, spotlight emotions during this because the literature on it is fascinating. So the two books that I'm going to be referencing, and I highly recommend if you like to purchase books and have a nice library. The first book, Spiritual Evolution by George Vaillant, professor of psychiatry at Harvard. This came out in 2008. I have referenced it. I have referenced this book in classes, and I even gave a high holiday sermon about my dog Max. And it really was George Vaillant's ideas in spiritual evolution, where I put together how our dog Max became April and my third child. Um, And so we'll talk more about that. Not just about my dog, your pets, mammals in general, dolphins, cats, um, any being talked about. We share a lot with our other mammalian sisters and brothers, and our emotional life is very much akin to theirs, although ours is more developed because we have this big brain. But the emotions are still there. They're still powerful. So we're going to look at Spiritual Evolution by George Vaillant. Beautifully written, by the way. He's very poetic, very well read, quotes poets, literature, religious hymns. He's Episcopalian. Also works with the Alcoholics Anonymous world. Has worked with the Alcoholics Anonymous folks for decades. He himself was not alcoholic, but he was very much there to help them and be a part of their spiritual practices. And he argues in Spiritual Evolution that their community and their spiritual practice is more powerful than his Episcopalian experiences. And again, back to the sense of community, back to the sense of emotion, back to the sense of just the community that has been created among folks in the 12-step program. So the other book we're going to look at, which came out 10 years later, 7 years ago, is written by a professor named Stephen Asma. So asthma, like the condition that I sometimes have and you might have, but without the TH, Stephen T. Asma, Why We Need Religion. That is published by Oxford University Press. So it is very scholarly, but very well written. But if you're going to choose one book, I would go with George Vaillant's. It's a fun read. It's a more engaging, easier read, more poetic. Although Stephen Asma's book is brilliant, his thesis is brilliant, and their ideas really complement each other. And we're going to talk about how. So just to give you the background again on George Vaillant, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He's about 90, 91, so he's retired. For 35 years, he was the director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which I've referenced many times during high holiday sermons. A number of books have been written by various directors of Harvard Study of Adult Development, looking at human beings, men in the Boston area, over the lifespan and what they've learned about human development. And he was also, George Vaillant was also on the steering committee on the University of Pennsylvania Center of Positive Psychology for 7 years. So we're going to be looking at positive emotions that he's identified as spiritual emotions. So that's very much in keeping with the positive psychology theory and application and practice that I've talked about over many, many years. So that's a little bit about George Vaillant, his background. Stephen Asma, professor of philosophy at Columbia College, Chicago. I had never heard of this school when I first heard that he was professor at Columbia. I thought, oh, it's in New York. It's actually in Chicago, where he's from. And he is a really a fascinating person, a great lecturer, and a really profound, deep thinker who also was a musician. So he talks about how art and religion are two pathways to sort of this mammalian spiritual emotional life. It's his thesis that art and music are a pathway to the heart of spirituality and emotional life. And George Valiant wouldn't disagree. It's just Stephen Asma speaks as a musician himself, a former musician, so he has more experience with that. So let's get to their ideas. Okay, so here is on one slide, I think the argument, the claim, the thesis that Dr. Valiant is making. And I'm going to say it and then I'm going to unpack it for you. And I encourage you, after I talk about it, if you have a question, raise your hand or unmute and please jump right in. So Dr. Valiant's thesis is that positive emotions, these are emotions, so positive emotions means emotions that make us feel good. These are emotions that we would say are pleasant emotions that all human beings possess. They are universal throughout time and throughout culture, as long as human beings have existed. That positive emotions such as compassion, forgiveness, love, hope, joy, faith/trust, awe, and gratitude, that these emotions arise from our inborn mammalian capacity for unselfish parental love. That any mammal who is caring for a baby, their baby, in whatever form that species that baby is, that we all have these emotions and they come. These emotions, compassion, forgiveness, love, hope, joy, faith, awe, and gratitude, they come from our ability as mammals, inborn to be a parent. And his thesis is they emanate from our feeling limbic mammalian brain and are thus grounded in our evolutionary heritage. Now I'm going to talk about, what's the limbic brain, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is the point. Since all mammals have a limbic system and emotions, many of them originate in the limbic brain, although the neocortex outside the limbic system also is interactive with these emotions. And you can't just say an emotion's right here. The brain is more interactive, neuroscientists found. So but the limbic system is key, and that's why we can share these emotions with our dogs and our cats and other animals, because we all have a limbic system and we all experience these emotions. So he continues, all human beings are hardwired for positive emotions. And here I bolded this point. These positive emotions are a common denominator of all major faiths of all human beings. That these emotions, compassion, forgiveness, love, hope, joy, faith, awe, gratitude, universal human emotions, are part of all major religions. Not only are they part of all major religions, he'll go one step further in this next piece that comes 14 pages later. For the last 3,000 years, Dr. Valiant posits, organized religions, for all their limitations, have been the best means that humanity has found for bringing the positive emotions into conscious reflection. That religion does these positive emotions like no other cultural apparatus can. Now, here's where maybe Stephen Asma might say, hey, I think religion and music does it just as good. So, but let's take it right now. Let's just sort of go with what Dr. Valiant is saying, is that organized religions really allows us to experience these emotions, and we put them front and center into our conscious reflection. All right, so let me give you an example of this. So again, the thesis is, and neuroscientists would say, you probably prove this. Every human being experiences awe, AWE. We all have moments of awe, and we're going to look at awe in just a moment. We all have moments of awe. Some people may not call it that, or they may not go deep into what is this feeling I'm having. I'm feeling goosebumps. And by the way, goosebumps is a physiological manifestation of awe. Could also mean you're really cold, but let's go with you're at the Grand Canyon and you are just overwhelmed by this majesty and beauty. That feeling is awe. And Judaism and other faiths talk about that experience all the time. The book of Psalms spotlights that feeling all the time. The book of Job does. Abraham Joshua Heschel, we're going to see in just a moment, makes that the foundation of religion is a sense of awe. So religion really fleshes out that feeling. And we do it through music as well. When we have music at services, or when we have a great story like the Passover story, what are the miracles and the plagues if not meant to be 10 plus 1, the splitting of the sea, 11 examples of God's awesome power to redeem the Jewish people? So awe is front and center. It is brought into our conscious reflection through our faith and through other faiths. Why don't I stop there for a second and see if you have any questions about that? I'm going to stop the share so I can see you better. Any questions so far about this thesis? Okay, does that mean it's pretty straightforward? It's making sense? Okay. All right, let's keep going. Again, what I find fascinating about this is he's arguing almost against what we would intuitively think, that religion is about ideas, it's about beliefs. George Valiant is saying, no, it's about emotions. And religion bringing those emotions to the fore, these innate capacity that every mammal has. I don't think your cat and my dog are going to get much from a sermon, but they are going to get a lot from feeling our love and our compassion and our forgiveness. Martha, your hand is raised.
Okay, then a question would be, why are religions so different?
Why are religions so different? So that's a great question. I think so. Sort of to answer that, and I encourage other people to chime in the chat box as well. Everything that we
Or
do,
are they? I guess you could
huh?
say.
Huh?
Or are they? Or are they different?
Well, so I think we can find a lot of common ground. And what we may discover if you've studied other religions is like, oh, yeah, that teaching is sort of like our teaching. I remember after 9/11, I went to an interfaith service after 9/11, and I mentioned when it was my turn to speak, and there was, an imam, and there were, Christian clergy and Buddhist and other faiths. And I shared the idea from the Talmud that says that to save a life is to save an entire world, and to destroy a life is destroy an entire world, right? That famous quote from the Talmud, to save a life, you're saving an entire world, and therefore the preciousness of human life. And an imam came up to me afterwards and he said, we've got that same statement, that same idea in Islam, in the Quran. So in some ways there is overlap, right? As I'm looking at Susan, as Susan likes to talk about the golden rule, treat others the way that you want to be treated. Every religion has that value, has that idea. So there is a lot of overlap in our values and our teachings, yet there are differences. The same way as mammals, as Homo sapiens, we have universal emotions, but people come from different parts of the world, and there are different rituals and different stories, and there's a different history in various parts of the world depending on where you come from. So we all live within a context, we all live within a cultural frame, and sometimes there's overlap to our cultural frames, and sometimes there are differences. And I would say the same about religion. It is a cultural creation. Religions are created by groups of people. And what Stephen Asma is going to argue so brilliantly, and this is what I love, I'll give you a little hint. Stephen Asma is going to say the reason that cultures create religion is because it not only allows us to experience emotion and put emotion front and center, but religion is an emotional management system. That the emotions that we experience in religion are therapeutic, and they help us survive. They keep the group together, and they help groups and individuals survive. It's very evolutionary. That's why George Valiant calls it spiritual evolution, because he refers to a genetic evolution, our mammalian, heritage of all having these emotions. Then he talks about individual evolution, the human development across a lifespan, how we evolve as we get older through human development. And then he also talks about, a cultural evolution that takes place. And religion is a cultural creation and a cultural evolution. So, and as Brian Vandergol said, we see the same similarities in belief in our book of Jonah and the Buddhist, okay, and the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, nice, right. And I'm just looking at some other things. I love that love and compassion are such a core aspect of every religion. It's so annoying that we can't find common ground and kindness with each other. That's such a great point, Felicity. And I want to share something. Again, I'm going to refer to these books all the time. George Valiant says if he were to choose one word to describe spirituality, that word is love. So when Christianity says God is love, and when I gave a high holiday sermon on Kol Nidre by Rabbi Schechter, the modern a writer, a wonderful Jewish philosopher and theologian and writer, he says Judaism is all about love. And I would argue, I would agree when George Valiant says that if you were to talk about spirituality in one word, that word is love. I would agree. And again, we can define love many ways, but the way we're looking at it in this class is it is a spiritual emotion. It is a religious emotion. The word love occurs hundreds of times in the Jewish Bible. It is front and center in Christianity. It's prominent in Buddhism, and I'm sure other faiths as well. So we just, Judaism, by the way, here's another way to look at this, Martha, and forgive everybody. I'm sorry, everybody, for the long answer, but it's important. There's a dialectic in Judaism between the universal and the particular, right? Universal values. We are all created b'tselem Elohim, one of the greatest principles of the Torah. Every human being is created in God's image, b'tselem Elohim. We are all deserving of worth and dignity. Each life is of infinite value and equal to every other human life. That is a Jewish value. That is a universal principle. Yet we also say that we have a Torah and we celebrate Passover. We're going to welcome people to our Passover Seder. We're going to have some Christian friends who are joining us for a Passover Seder here at Temple Sinai. But it is the Jewish story. It's our story that we share with the world. So there's a dialectic, I think, in all faiths between the universal and the particular. And we want to honor both. We want to honor both. We want to honor the diversity in our faiths as well as honoring the what we have in common. Okay, all right. So why don't we continue? Thank you, Martha. Thank you for that question. So let's continue. I'm going to share my screen again. I'm going to try to see if I can do it through a keyboard. Did that work? No. Let's try it one more time. Okay. Okay, can everybody see my screen again? Yeah? Okay, great. So let's continue. So I want to share with you something that both George Valiant and Stephen Asma talk about in their books. And this is considered to be, it's called the triune brain idea. This came in the from a neuroscientist named Paul MacLean. And Carl Sagan talked about this and sort of made this famous too. And so the idea of sort of the three-layered brain, most neuroscientists today would say this is too simplistic. This is too simplistic of a model. And there, now neuroscientists talk about different brain networks, and but it's still valuable to use this from a teaching standpoint. It's still valuable to talk about this. So the what neuroscientists used to refer to a few decades ago, or even up to a decade ago, was this idea that there are sort of three layers of animal evolution to the brain. The first layer, sort of the brainstem and the cerebellum, is sort of like sometimes called the reptilian brain. The limbic system, which is where emotions we're going to be talking about, that's where the mammalian emotions come from. That's why I don't know, a sheep or another type of mammal is not going to eat their young like a reptile might. I think crocodile, I think I read somewhere where little baby crocodiles, after they're hatched, they roll around in feces so their parents won't eat them, and they just know through evolution and through that learning passed on through their genes, I better make myself unattractive or my parents might eat me. That's not going to happen, I think, in most cases with mammals. So because mammals possess this other layer, this limbic system that we all possess, which has like the amygdala and the hippocampus. I don't want to get bogged down in brain anatomy because I'm really not that good at it and I don't want to make a mistake. But you can look up, what are the main elements of a limbic system and how do they function. But just to know, when we talk about emotion, primarily in the limbic system, but also communicating with the neocortex, and that is the big brains that human beings have, and I think dolphins have as well. I think dolphins are known to have a pretty big neocortex, but since we can't understand their language, we don't really know how they think and how they plan and all of that good stuff. So we're going to be focused on that sort of midbrain area, the limbic system, but recognizing too, it communicates with the neocortex. We can't just point to the limbic system and say, oh, love, all the love that we feel is in those neurons in the limbic system. They're also in the neocortex. They're in other areas. By the way, we also do feel emotions in our heart. The heart has neurons, has an emotional neurons, and so does the stomach. When you talk about a gut feeling, there's a reason it's called the gut feeling. There are neurons in our stomach that communicate with our brains and with our limbic system. I think through the vagus nerve, which runs throughout the body, one of the biggest nerves that we have. And communication is taking place not only between the neocortex and the limbic system, but between the gut, the heart, and the limbic system and the neocortex. So it's helpful to think of with this tripartite model, but it's deeper, it's more complex than that. Hopefully that makes sense, because we're going to move on. And what we're going to look at next. So again, I just want to, I already expressed them, but I'm just laying it out for you here. So the 8 spiritual religious emotions that George Vaillant talks about in his book, Spiritual Evolution, he's got a chapter on each one, and it's fun to read what he does with each one. So joy, gratitude, hope, awe, love, forgiveness, compassion, and faith or trust. I bolded joy, awe, love, and compassion because those are the 4 we're going to focus on in these next 2 classes. And I'm adding one from Stephen Asma, grief. Stephen Asma focuses more on what we might call the more stressful or anxiety or unpleasant emotions. But they're important. It's important to recognize that we also have emotions that are painful to us, but they are still tremendously valuable. And Judaism and other religions do focus on them. And, clearly when we think about Judaism and the wisdom in Judaism with its mourning practices, its grief practices, it's such a powerful spiritual practice in Judaism, how to mourn. And again, Stephen Asma devotes a chapter on that in his book, Why We Need Religion. And religion addresses suffering, right? I mean, think of Buddhism. The first principle of Buddhism is life is suffering, life is unsatisfactory. Buddhism addresses that, but so does Judaism, and so does Christianity, so does every religion. Every religion worth its salt is going to address the positive emotions as well as painful emotions such as grief, sadness, sorrow, anger, lust, rage, like anger. So it's important to, I think, address the full gamut of human emotion and mammalian emotion. And by the way, animals feel grief as well, right? When we talk about grief, animals feel grief, they feel sadness, they feel sorrow. They did a study, I think it was maybe Stephen Asma talks about, or maybe George Vaillant. Sometimes both books are in my head right now. Elephants are known to cry. Some elephants are known to cry, and you hear them audibly crying when they are separated from their family members. So it's important to address that emotion too. So, but from George Vaillant, joy, awe, love, and compassion. And from Stephen Asma, we're going to look at grief. Okay, so now let's look at Stephen Asma's thesis of his book. And I've alluded to it, but we'll just go a little bit deeper. So he says, religion, like art, has direct access to our emotional lives in ways that science does not. So in some ways, he's echoing what George Vaillant's thesis is, that religion really is doing the best work more than any other cultural apparatus with these emotions that we feel. And Stephen Asma is going to add art to the mix because he's an artist, he's a musician. So, and here's where he also goes a little deeper, or he goes in a different direction. Religion helps people, rightly or wrongly, manage their emotional lives. Religion helps people manage their emotional lives. He says, he argues very strongly that religion is an emotional management system. It is a therapeutic system to manage our emotions, which is a very strong contention, but there's a lot of truth to it. And then he goes on to say adaptive emotions, meaning any emotion that we have evolved that helps us thrive and survive, helps us adapt in an evolutionary sense. Any emotion that helps us adapt to living and helps us survive and pass on our genes. And folk psychology and cultural transmissions, back to the idea of religion as a cultural transmission, are enough to generate most religious life. So he's saying these emotions, this psychology, this is enough to generate most of our religious life. The metaphysical beliefs, what we believe, the tenets of our faith, he says, are part of a feedback loop, but they're not the prime movers or motivators of religious life. They're not the prime movers and motivators of religious life. And if you think about emotion for a second, the word emotion, emote, it makes us move. Emotions are meant to motivate and stimulate behavior, either moving towards something or moving away from something. So built into the whole idea, the whole theory of emotion is they are there to activate us to do something. So it makes sense that they're the prime motivator of religion, because that's what emotions do. They motivate us to act or not act or to do something. Okay, why don't we take a second and just see if you have any questions about those ideas. And by the way, as Jill was saying, religion is often used to help with anxiety and depression. Absolutely. And that is a major contention of Stephen Asma. And he will look at 7 very powerful human emotions, painful human emotions, and he will show in each of those chapters how religion is a therapeutic approach to dealing with anxiety, depression, rage, lust, a number of emotions. So any questions about what Stephen Asma is contending? Okay, Renee, you've got your hand up?
Um, what does Professor Asma mean by folk psychology? I don't understand what folk psychology is.
Well, I think folk psychology means like pre-scientific psychology. So, for example, there is a psychology in Judaism to grief work, and that was created thousands of years before psychology was a science.
With
A
like,
folk psychology that, for example, so I'll give you an example. It says in the book of Job, and we'll talk about grief, next week. But the idea in the book of Job is that this righteous man Job suffers tremendous loss of his children and his property, and he is grieving deeply. He lost all his kids in a terrible situation, and friends come to console him, to make him feel better, and they do not speak until Job speaks to them. So Judaism has a principle based on that, that when we go to visit somebody who is in mourning, we listen. We don't start talking too much other than saying hello and I'm so sorry for your loss and how are you doing, but we are there to listen more than there to talk. That is folk psychology. That is we are involved in a therapeutic role by just being there and listening. Does that answer that, Renee? Okay. Okay. Okay, Hillary's saying folk psychology is a term for common sense, right? How do we, people have been managing their emotions for thousands of years. So yeah, there's some common sense to it. Has been used in medical academic literature since the last century. Oh, okay, thank you, Hillary. So yeah, so it's there's a lot of wisdom in religion too. By the way, the word psychologist literally, right, means a study of the soul. Psyche means the Greek word soul. So before there were psychologists and psychiatrists, religion were doing that soul work. Um, Okay, so let's continue on. I am going to share, whoops. Okay, well, this is good. Oh, okay, you can't see that, thankfully. All right, so we're going to talk about an emotion right now from a Jewish standpoint, psychological standpoint. I am going to share my screen, so bear with me. And I want you to just listen and experience this. Open yourself to this video I'm going to share from YouTube, of all places, from a Samsung Galaxy commercial. And then we're going to talk about it. So give me a second. I want to make sure I share this right. Okay, so I'm going to share that. And give me one more second. Oh, there was a way I'm supposed to do this. Can you all still hear me? Let me try one more thing. I want to make sure I do this right. Okay. All right, I got it. Okay, I'm going to stop it for a second. Let me go back. I really did practice this earlier, but I'm not seeing where I had the option. Does anybody remember how to share, and you're trying to share sound through a YouTube? Does anybody know how to do this?
Rabbi, we heard it when it started.
Yeah, but there's a way I can say use my speakers and
I don't know. All I know
all
is I
right.
did hear it.
Okay, so let me try it, and if you can't hear it, oh wait, there it is. Oh, it was on the side, and it actually had it selected. Great. Okay, thank you, Susan. So here we go. So please enjoy. And by the way, you can make it bigger by the two little lines between the pictures of everybody, the little boxes of everybody, and the screen. You can move it to the right to make it larger. So here we go. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's try that again. Sorry about that. All right, good old YouTube. Okay. Not to plug, yeah, not to plug Samsung. I love it. In a minute and 30 or so, they really put together some awesome, awesome images from throughout the world. So, what did you, what were you thinking? What were you feeling as you were watching those images? And feel free to unmute. Felt awe, Renee Steinberg. Felicity said, can we think of awe and peace as synonyms? I do think that many awesome experiences can be very peaceful. I mean, I put the image behind me because I find it to be very serene and peaceful. By the way, the one issue, I know why George Valiant did what he did. Serenity, peace is a positive emotion that is very much a part of religions. And the reason George Valiant, I think, did not um, address it in his book is because he's addressing emotions that we share with one another, that you have to be in relationship with somebody else in order to experience, or relationship with something else, or experience gratitude or forgiveness or awe or something. Peace one can feel within themselves. One can be, alone and experience peace, but the other emotions are very much communal emotions. But I do think peace and serenity often do go in tandem. Felicity, a very good point, with a sense of awe. Very much so. Any other things you want to share about looking at those images? Okay, well, let's continue on then, because we do have plenty to discuss. So let me share my screen one more time, and I want to start now getting to the Jewish values related to awe, AWE. Okay. So maybe you can put in the chat box. Philip, the beauty miracle of nature. Yes. So sort of building upon what Philip just put in, maybe let's put in the chat box, when do you experience awe? And let's define our terms here. This will be helpful. So this is by a preeminent researcher in awe, Dacher Keltner, who's at the University of California at Berkeley. Dacher, if I put this up, can you see it? So this is his book called Awe. This came out in 2023. I listed it there too as a source. So fantastic book. He's a wonderful writer. Anything that Dacher Keltner does is awesome. By the way, he was consulted for the animated movie Inside Out when they were talking, and both versions, when they were talking about emotion. He was one of the people consulted, and he's fantastic. And his Greater Good Science Center at UC Berkeley is fantastic. Greater Good Science Center. If you check that out, they've got phenomenal resources. Articles as well as videos and podcasts. So Dacher Keltner has been studying this for probably 4 decades. He's been studying awe, I think, since the 80s. And he simply says, awe is the emotion we experience when we encounter vast mysteries that we don't understand. Now, I must say, I take a little bit of issue with the idea of don't understand. I understand the sunset behind me. I understand those images that we saw. I'll just go with the vastness of it. I'll just go with the beauty of it. But the idea being just the way he's defining it, just as a psychologist, and psychologists have to define their terms so they can do research papers and get published and get tenure. So he may have reasons for going a little bit deeper. But we're dealing just with vast, awe-inspiring experiences. And sometimes it's related to what we don't understand. And he says it sort of the same way. He said this in 2003, and he just expanded upon it 20 years later. He just changed the way he said it. Awe is the feeling of being in the presence of something vast that transcends our current understanding of the world. again, we may disagree with the second part, but there may be some cases where we do agree with the second part, but we may certainly agree with the first part. When we encounter something vast, something not only vast, but deep, mysterious, such as life, birth, death. Those are mysteries. We can't really do it on our own. We're sort of given these experiences that are somewhat mysterious. We may understand them scientifically, but a mystery still remains. Life and death and illness and healing. We can understand them on a cognitive level, but there is something still we don't fully understand, so there's a mystery to it. Religion's very good at addressing mysteries. I like that, Philip, something that elevates us to another level of consciousness. Yes, these are transformative emotions. These are meant to be emotions that transform us, that take us to a transcendent state, that alter our consciousness. Well said, Philip. Um, and Felicity, when I observe human connection, they will talk about a related concept of elevation. And again, sort of more of a scientific term, a psychological term, elevation. When we see somebody else behaving morally, somebody else making sacrifices for the greater good, that elevates us. That is awe-inspiring. I was filled with awe by the goodness of my son's surgeon, Dr. Andrus at Children's Hospital. I saw her running around. I saw the hours that she put in. I mean, I could scratch the surface. I just know she's just devoting herself as most doctors and nurses do. They devote themselves, they sacrifice themselves for the healing of other people. That is an awe-inspiring practice. That is why healing is revered in Judaism. My daughter, the doctor, my son, the doctor, right? That is one of the greatest senses of pride that one could have. I think it's because of how we revere, healing practices. So yeah, there's human actions that somebody who jumps in to save somebody, jumps into a raging river to save, somebody who fell in or their car fell in and they're risking their life to save somebody else. Those are awe-inspiring human activities. It elevates us. And it is somewhat mysterious. Wow. They risk their life to save this person. Would I have done the same thing in that situation? I'm not sure. So it's somewhat of a mystery. So yeah, there are so many sources of awe. It's an everyday experience. That's the point that Dacher Keltner makes in his book. These are everyday awe-filled experiences. So we all experience it, we can experience every day multiple times a day. So what does Judaism say about awe? I love this quote by Heschel. Heschel says, awe precedes faith. It is the root of faith. We must grow in awe in order to reach faith. Awe rather than faith is the cardinal attitude of the religious Jew. From his book, God in Search of Man, 75, is that 75? Is that 80 years ago? No, that's 70 years ago. 70 years ago, Heschel, the philosopher, said awe is the cardinal attitude of a Jewish person. He used to teach at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and he'd go to visit his students and teach them in the evening. And he would sometimes say to his students, you're not going to believe it, a tremendous miracle happened on the way over to class. And his students said, what happened? What was the miracle? What happened? He said, the sunset. To get them to see that a sunset is deserving of awe and wonder. And if you experience it for the first time, it is miraculous. And when we lose our ability to feel awe, we're losing a bit of our humanity because it is really meant to be an ongoing human experience. It's a human emotion. We fail to, manifest that emotion. We're losing a big part of what it means to be human. And according to Heschel, we are losing a tremendous part of what it means to be Jewish and to be religious. And to Martha's point too, just noticing in the chat box, human-made items are also awe-inspiring. Absolutely. Absolutely. New York City. Just walk around New York City. And, April and I went there on the sabbatical last March and saw the new Freedom Tower, tallest building in North America, I think. It's awe-inspiring. Wow, how do people even build that? I can't even build a house. How do you build that? That is a mystery. That is awe-inspiring. Bridges are, to me, how do people build bridges? How do they do that underwater? Why would they risk their life to build this bridge? It's awe-inspiring. Hoover Dam, it's awe. Mars rover, yeah. International Space Station, it's awe. It's all deserving of our awe. Absolutely. So anyway, Heschel, such a great quote. And this is where, and this is in our prayer books. If you remember the old maroon gates of repentance at the beginning of the book, such a beautiful, beautiful teaching. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, spiritual giant, and he's in some ways he's quoting his great grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement. And this is a adaptation of the idea. Just as the hand held before the eye can hide the tallest mountain, you try it sometime. When you're here at Temple Sinai, put your hands in front, you won't see the Verdugo Mountains. Just as the hand held before the eye can hide the tallest mountain, so too the routine of everyday life can keep us from seeing the vast radiance, the secret wonders that fill the world. So what we are being asked to do by Rabbi Nachman and by the Hasidic tradition is to remove that hand. What is the obstacle for us seeing the vast radiance and the secret wonders that fill our world? We've got to remove the obstacles. We've got to remove the blinders so that we can see it and experience what Rabbi Heschel is talking about. Rabbi Heschel is Hasidic. He comes from the Hasidic tradition. I think his grandfather or his great-grandfather was a huge Hasidic leader, as was he. So, and the proverbial stop and smell the roses. Yeah, that's gratitude and that's awe. And again, gratitude and awe go hand in hand, just like peace and awe are interwoven. Gratitude and awe. Stop and smell the roses. Don't take these things for granted. One of my favorite quotes about this comes from Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Zen Buddhist teacher who died a few years ago. He was quoting, I think, an 8th or 9th century. It's not his idea. He just popularized it. It was an 8th or 9th century Zen teacher. I forget the Zen teacher's name. I have it written down somewhere. The teaching is the miracle is not to walk on water, right? Referring to Jesus and walking on water. He said the miracle is not to walk on water. The miracle is to walk on the earth. That is the miracle. If we can see that as a miracle, we're living with awe. We are
Rabbi Ruth Goldstein has her hand raised.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. I'm sorry I didn't see that, Ruth. There's something in front of it. Yeah, please, Ruth.
I have a client who was telling me about today about a woman in her congregation, she's Catholic, who turned 100, and she invited 70 of her friends, and they came from all over the country to wish her a happy birthday. And I thought that was so beautiful and certainly full of awe. I told her that was just such a wonderful thing, that 100, she had still 70 friends who came from all over.
Wow.
Mhm.
Yeah, that is awesome. That
Mhm.
is awesome. Yeah, Some people can live to be 100.
Yes, exactly.
That's a mystery.
She was clear-minded and she could
And clear-minded. Amazing.
Ah.
Somebody was telling me recently, and they were saying, I just, lived on this earth for 93 years, and it literally stopped me in my tracks. I'm like, I didn't realize this person was 93 years old. They're sharp, they're active, they're vibrant. There's like no cognitive decline that I can see. Is like 93 years old. My God, how do you do that? How do you maintain that mental sharpness? I mean, it's obviously it's genetic, but it's awesome. It's incredible. Most people aren't able to do that. I literally had to look up, is this person really that old? Amazing. Amazing. 100 years old. Amazing. All right, great. Thank you for sharing that, Ruth. All right, let us take a look at, give me one more second so I can share the screen. Okay. Okay, sorry I didn't see you there, Ruth. There's something right over your picture. I'm gonna click, how do I get rid of that? It's asking me to do something and I'm gonna click, okay, now it's gone. Now I can see you and Lisa. Okay, like I was saying, the book of Job, stand still and consider the wondrous works of God. Sometimes we do have to stand still. We've got to stop. We've got to pause. If we don't take the time to experience something at that deep level, we're not gonna feel the awe and the wonder. It's almost an act of will, although sometimes it can just hit us without us even trying to be awestruck. But sometimes we do need to have a mindset that we bring to it. Stand still. Consider the wondrous works of God. Consider the wondrous works of nature, whatever word you want to put after, wondrous works. Consider the wondrous works of childbirth. Consider the wondrous works of, anything that gives you a sense of awe. I'm going to go back because I skipped ahead. Again, the book of Psalms, as I was saying, is filled with this. One of the most famous, when we behold your heavens, the psalmist, when we behold your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and stars that you set in place, what are we humans that you are mindful of us? We mortals that you take note of us, almost expressing awe that God even cares about us. What are we that you even care about us? You made us little less than divine. You adorned us with glory and majesty. You've given us the tremendous power to have dominion over your handiwork. You've laid the world at our feet. How majestic is your name throughout the earth. That is an expression of awe. And to quote Spider-Man's Uncle, was it Uncle Ben? With great power comes great responsibility. So the psalmist isn't saying, oh, because you've given us this power, I'm going to take advantage of it. No, there's an expression of humility. Awe creates a sense of humility within us. So it stimulates an emotion of humility. What are we? Who am I? Again, from the Hasidic tradition, we should carry two, stones in our pockets or two pieces of paper in our pockets. One says, I am but dust and ashes, meaning I'm so humble, I'm nothing, I'm dust and ashes. And another in the other pocket, but for my sake was the world created. All of this is for me. But I'm dust and ashes at the same point. So there's a sense of awe and humility working in tandem. in that Jewish teaching and in that quote. Okay. Oh, I lost a picture. That's too bad. There was a picture of a starlit night. I don't know why it's not showing. Maybe I've got too many windows open. But so here's this beautiful scene like we looked at in the Samsung. Here's a little baby, a cute little baby. And so we cultivate awe by looking up, looking around us, looking down, looking around, looking within. I think it says in the book of Job, I am wondrously made. So that's, again, the biblical writer just even looking at one's physical, just one's own existence and recognizing we are wondrously made, right? The human brain with 100 billion neurons and trillions upon trillions of connections. Is that not awe-inspiring? We can look within. I should have said look within, look around, look up, look down. These are all ways to cultivate awe. All right. Why don't I stop the share there? And other thoughts about awe? Anything else any questions thus far about what we've been talking about? All right. Do you want me to try to do joy in 10 minutes? I can try. Yeah. Yeah. Awe does breed humility. Awe, by the way, and check out Dacher Keltner's stuff at Greater Good or read his book, Awe, or get it from, check it out from the library. They've done studies at UC Berkeley where there's like a T-Rex somewhere on UC Berkeley's campus. Louise, you might know where this is. There's some huge, T-Rex model, and they would have students look at the T-Rex and then, ask questions or somehow get them to be generous. And then they'd have other students, another group, not look at the T-Rex and see how generous they were, how giving they were. And I forget what the criteria was, but it was some act of generosity. The people who had just seen the T-Rex and felt awe were more generous than people who did not just have an experience of awe. So awe breeds humility, it breeds generosity, it breeds a sense of a group dynamic. Dacher Keltner's also an evolutionary affective neuroscientist. His contention, and he's not alone in thinking this, a number of people who study awe say the reason we have developed awe is so that we will survive as a group, that we will cooperate with each other. Awe instills a sense of cooperation and group solidarity to maybe deal with threats, predators, and it serves an evolutionary purpose to keep us alive, as well as having all these other benefits of group solidarity and humility and kindness and generosity and peace. So it's a very powerful. It packs a strong spiritual. I don't want to say punch, but anyway, it's a powerful human emotion, and that's why Heschel puts it front and center for Jewish life. So let me try to make some headway into joy, and maybe we'll continue, and we'll have a bit of a cliffhanger, and we'll continue the discussion next week. So sharing my screen. Oh, there it is. Ah, okay. So there's the starlit night. Okay, so this is another sort of positive psychologist, a positive emotion person named Barbara Fredrickson. She's got a wonderful book called Positivity, where she looks at 10 positive emotions, 10 emotions that make us feel good and that are pleasant and not painful. And her list of 10 very much overlaps with George Vaillant's list. It's funny, the books were written, I think, the same year. They were published in the same year. I don't know if they both knew they were working on a similar book. But in Barbara Fredrickson's book, she talks about joy, as does George Vaillant. And she says the joy feels bright and light. Colors seem more vivid. There's a spring in your step when you experience joy, and your face lights up with a smile and an inner glow. You feel like taking it all in. You feel playful. You want to jump in and get involved. So that's a description of joy. And of course, joy is a primary human emotion. Some people might call it happiness, although George Vaillant will make a distinction between joy and happiness. He sees happiness as more fleeting, more just a quick pleasure, a quick burst of pleasure, fleeting, evanescent and temporary, whereas joy is deeper, more prolonged, such as seeing a grandchild. That joy is going to be there all the time, right? Unless they're doing something that's making you angry. But that joy is going to be, a little bit more permanent than taste the chocolate, which I happen to love. And you might too. Jill Namiro, my dog gives me so much joy. Yes. Yeah, when we think of our sources of joy, there are many, and again, everyday joys. So let's again go to Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Always remember, he says, joy is not merely incidental to your spiritual quest, it is vital. Again, very much a Hasidic idea that joy is primary to our spiritual path, our religious path. And Nachman, I think, said it brilliantly and powerfully. It's not incidental, it's vital to our spiritual quest. Again, from the book of Psalms, the Psalms is filled with these emotions, joyful and positive, as well as sorrow and sadness and grief and loss and anger and the whole gamut of human emotions. The book of Psalms contains them all, and it contains a lot of joy. So the book of Psalm 16, in your presence, God, is fullness of joy. Right? Andrew said, or I'm sorry, Susan said, Andrew is a source of joy, and as to all of us, indeed. Indeed. And then the great quote from the book of Psalms 100, Ivduet Adonai b'simcha, serve God with joy. That we are to do mitzvot, that we are to do our religious practices and live our religious and spiritual lives with joy. So we've been answering when we experience joy. Any other comments that you can put in the chat of when you experience joy? And as you're thinking of some, let's talk about Passover. So this will be a segue in just a moment to wishing everybody a happy Passover. In addition to feeling a sense of awe during a Passover, we're also supposed to experience a sense of joy. Our tradition sets the calendar around Passover. The month of Nisan is the first month. The Jewish New Year is in the 7th month, linked to Shabbat, but The Jewish calendar begins with Passover. Our calendar is set by Passover. We must celebrate Passover in the spring, as opposed to other religions that don't have a solar lunar calendar like Islam. Ramadan occurs anytime throughout the year. Ramadan moves throughout the calendar, whereas the Jewish calendar says Passover must occur in the spring to link the joy of freedom, the joy of liberation, with the joy of spring. We don't want to celebrate Passover in the winter when it's freezing cold and dark or raining. It's got to be in the springtime so that we get the full joyful effect. So our holidays, many of our holidays, Hanukkah is a joyful time, even though it's the darkest time of year. Many kids would say it's more joyful than Passover to them. So I guess joy's in the eye of the beholder. Now, if it was gift-giving time at Passover, I think kids would feel differently about Hanukkah. They might say, oh yeah, Passover is the most joyful. So I do think it is gift-driven, but there are many Jewish Purims, a joyful holiday, Sukkot. Zman Simchatenu. Sukkot is the season of our joy. Linking again, joy with gratitude. Gratitude is linked to so many positive emotions. So joy is everywhere. Let me now scroll down. Art brings joy, absolutely. Andrea, I try to keep joy in my heart at all times instead of just having to be a reaction to something external. Yeah, to cultivate joy, to create it, to not just be a bystander and be a recipient of joy, but to actively be joyful. And that's a very Hasidic approach, by the way. I mean, you look at the life of most Hasids in Eastern Europe, there wasn't a lot on paper to be joyful about, right? They didn't, have a lot of money. They lived in squalor. There were pogroms. There maybe not have been a lot of food. They cultivated joy as an act of will. They found plenty to be joyful about. So external factors aren't necessary to be joyful. It may not, your joy is not necessarily conditional on external factors. So it's a great point. Great point, Andrea. Being
Rabbi,
part of it.
Philip's hand is up.
Oh, thank you, Philip.
Just
Yeah,
want to
thank you.
add something. So at my office, we are sending out Passover cards to some of our constituents and donors who celebrate Passover. And the person who was looking for them didn't find Passover cards. She just found blank cards with images of flowers in spring.
Yeah.
So I figured most of my colleagues are not going to know what to write or what to say. So I sent them a suggestion, and it reads as follows. The arrival of spring showcases the beauty of nature when renewal and redemption are celebrated. Wishing you a joyous Passover.
Nice. So there's that link between springtime and joy and the Passover season. Yeah, thank you, Philip. Thank you. Great example. And Renee had said being part of a community brings joy. Absolutely. Being part of a group. Again, back to our social connections. As mammals, we are social creatures, one of the most social animals there is on this planet. And we find joy in other people. We find joy in community. That's why it's hard to be Jewish alone. Who are you going to celebrate with? Who are you going to spin a dreidel with? You just going to spin a dreidel by yourself and eat latkes and light the menorah by yourself? It can be done. It's not as joyful, though, as doing it with other people. And as Kathleen said, waking up every morning to what the new day holds is joyful. Yeah, beautiful idea. Each new day has got possibilities for joy and many other wonders and blessings as well. I want to share something that was, yeah, Louise, you had sent that to me as a direct, yeah, and can you want me to read this out loud? Yes, because this is the point that George Valiant makes very powerfully. Louise said, interesting how sometimes we have to look for joy when there is sadness. Other times joy is right in front of us. When we see our pride in our children and our grandchildren, the link between joy and sadness is one that George Valiant makes, and he quotes William Blake, the great romantic poet, in Auguries of Innocence, 1863. William Blake said, joy and woe are woven fine. Joy and sorrow, sadness, suffering are woven fine, a clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. It is right it should be so. Man was made, oh, human beings were made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go. So, and one could argue maybe we would not feel joy if we did not suffer. Maybe joy is the experience having gone through suffering and coming through it and having a moment where you're not suffering, that you feel it all the more powerfully, perhaps as joy, because you experienced suffering. Again, I'll quote Thich Nhat Hanh. He said, I don't want to live in a world where there is no suffering, because where there is no suffering, there is no compassion. There is no understanding. So he saw suffering as a precondition to experiencing virtues and a positive emotion like compassion, and maybe he would say joy too. So yeah, they do sometimes go together, and sometimes there is no suffering, and we just experience the joy of being with kids and grandkids. Yeah, and Andrea saying suffering elevates the experience of joy. Allowing grief is so important, says Martha. We all probably have met people who want to always put a positive spin on everything. Yeah, yeah, it's the full gamut of emotions. And with this, I'll conclude. And by the way, I appreciate everybody's um, extra time. We're just going a little bit over, so I just want to give you one more quote, one more teaching related to what Martha's saying that will lead us into next week when we talk about grief. We will talk about compassion, and we will talk about love. Stephen Hayes, a modern day psychologist, created a approach to therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And the approach of Stephen Hayes, I've talked about him before, is that we need to accept all of our emotions, positive and negative and neutral, everything in between, and we accept all of them, and then we commit to our values, and we don't let our suffering keep us from pursuing the values that we have in life. It's a brilliant teaching. I find it very spiritual and very Jewish as well. And he tells the story of visiting his mother when she was dying and traveling, getting on an airplane to visit his mother and watching her die. And he says, as painful as it was, I wouldn't have missed that for the world. He said, I'd pay $100,000 to have that experience, that I could be at the bedside of my mother and be there when she died. That he would pay good money to have that experience, which is very painful, but it's also an expression of love. I don't know if it's an expression of joy, but it's clearly an expression of love. So as a lead into how these emotions do, sort of intertwine, and it's not all rainbows and unicorns. No religion worth its salt would suggest that, and I don't think any psychologist worth their salt would suggest that. So we're going to talk more about grief, and we'll talk about love, and we'll talk about compassion. That is going to be next Tuesday, same time, same place, same Zoom link. We are going to send out a link. Ruth Devine is going to send out a link and a reminder through email and through text. And so thank you all for being a part of this. I want to wish you all a very happy Passover, Hag Sameach. Have a wonderful Passover celebration. And we hope to see some of you here at Temple Sinai at our community Seder. And why don't we all unmute and wish each other a Hag Sameach and a happy Passover. And
thank you to you, Rabbi.
Yes.
Sameach, Rabbi.
Hag Sameach.
Thank you.
Happy Passover.
Hag Sameach.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all. Okay, I'm going to stop the